Send her back. Send her back. Send her back. There is a particular ridiculousness to such phrases in America and American history. I'm an American and I'm a migrant. I'm an immigrant. I've lived in several different parts of the world. And when I say lived in, I mean legitimately had my papers to live and work and even settle in some of the places where I've lived. So when I hear such messages of send them back, I want to specifically speak to the American experience because I'm still trying to work out what that means, for example, here in Britain and Britain first, with the colonies of the world that Britain has had and the invitations sent out to all those people in the former colonies, rightfully because Britain has gained and grown so much. And in fact, the Britain's colonies fueled the Industrial Revolution. So that would sound ridiculous here. But that's interestingly related to why that sounds really ridiculous in America. So let's work this out. So in America, when someone like Trump and his supporters, say that someone's complaining, they should go back to their country and leave us alone. And that's so ridiculous because the presumption, of course, is that who is our country. And in this instance, and I say this is why it's linked to the UK, because the presumption is that not only is America a colony of the UK, but in some metaphorical sense, a colony of the West, and that it's our country. Because send them back is specifically, it's saying them, it's the finger pointing, but it's also those fingers pointing back. So you're saying, okay, so who belongs here? And okay, so we have the very clear racialized history, go back to Africa, which again in itself was ridiculous because obviously those people being told to go back to Africa were non-voluntary people who came here. So there's that, and that's why it's ridiculous. There's the ridiculousness of all of the labor and other forms of input, intellectual input that so many different people from every part of the world have put into this American project. So when you say send them back, would you say before or after they did that thing that you brought them here to do, to build railroads or to, build NASA or to make nuclear bomb? No one told all those World War II, including some former Nazi scientists who were recruited to create America's military weaponry. Were they told to go back to where they came from? So we know that historically, go back to where you came from has been used in this way to draw this line. There is the non-white and the other. It's a phrase used to demarcate the color line and to pretend that history doesn't exist or to act as if you were a full adult saying it, chatting in some crowd and you don't know is as disingenuous as saying that you don't understand that celebrating the Confederacy is not also celebrating a specific part of our history, but a part of our history that was bent on this color line and the oppression, the caste system of the color line. So those two things just inherently go together. And that's why when I hear people saying, go back to where they came to to the so-called squad in Congress, it sounds so ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous when it is directed at Congresswoman Omar, who is actually a person who came naturalized through all the legitimate channels. In fact, the most humane and legitimate channel that we know, that's refugee status. And people keep saying, well, the others were born here, but I want to focus on her because in a sense, she did come from somewhere else. We'll leave the other three because they have their own roots. The AOC's from the Bronx. And as all of the late night comedians have pointed out, if Trump is telling AOC to go back to where she came from and fix her crime infested, country, then she's actually talking about him, like America. She's saying that, you go back to your crime infested America. And ironically, and that brings us to the last part. So with Omar, okay, so send her back. So you want to send back someone who came in as a refugee. That's the other part where you really have to ask, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus be saying? Get out, because you came from somewhere as a political refugee, and not just anywhere. Like Somalia specifically is still in a state where people believe would be offered refugee status. So the specifics of that aren't what matter in this case, but it's that ethos of there is a non-white other that is polluting white purity. And that's why it's called a caste system, because it is bent on this, the color line is a line of pollution and purity. And so it's particularly insidious to say that to someone who has a refugee background. Okay, but then just get back to the other three who are Americans like me, who are Americans of color. Even with migration background, like my father's also a naturalized American from a so-called S-hole country in Africa. And so would he be telling my father to go back home, who came here as a student, worked hard, got, the average level of education that people from his country have, which is a master's degree in America, and lived out his life, working, contributing, paying taxes, employing other people. Is that the person you want to tell back to go to their country, who he himself is an American, whose children are born and raised in American of Americans, born of Americans? And so you have to think, what exactly are they talking about? And it really does reveal that we really are just talking about this color line, forced assimilation of people to become into the fold. That's what this color line has done. And the fact that we're talking all along, we talk about identity politics. And remember, when we're talking about identity politics, we're also talking about white identity politics. So, for example, through the 90s, where even the phrase people of color comes from, you would have people dismissing it because, oh my gosh, identity politics and it doesn't matter your color. That actually is white identity politics. So it's all part and parcel of the fold. And this is what we're seeing here is a part of white identity politics. And it's painful to see it in this day and age. And it's almost ridiculous because, again, any one of them could have sat down with someone like me or you and explained to them why send them back as racist, lest they didn't know, because obviously they didn't hear it at the dinner table.